On July 30th, 1930, in Montevideo, Uruguay, in front of 68,000 fans, the very first FIFA World Cup was held, featuring Uruguay and Argentina, where Uruguay was able to defeat Argentina 4-2 to take the very first FIFA World Champion. But it was a long road to get to this point. And here's a story behind the very first FIFA World Cup. Today on Daily Sports History. Welcome to Daily Sports History. I'm Ethan Reese, your guide to a rapid deep dive into sports history every day. And today's trivia question to listen out for is, why was there only 13 teams to compete in the very first World Cup when there was supposed to be 14? Now, in a previous episode, which we'll link in the show notes, we went all over how FIFA started back in 1904, which started in Europe. So the question is, how did the very first World Cup come to be played in a small South American country of Uruguay? Well, to start with, they needed to decide why they wanted to have the World Cup to begin with, as they had, up until that point, helped the Summer Olympics hold their football competition on behalf of the IOC. But the problem was, there was a growth of professional soccer or football being played all over the world. And the moment you became a professional, you were no longer eligible for the Summer Olympics. So FIFA thought they would hold their own tournament outside of the Olympics to be able to include any athlete to play for their country, no matter the status of amateurism or professionalism. And at the 17th FIFA Congress held in Amsterdam, they officially accepted to hold their own World Cup that would not be in confines of Olympic rules. And they would not compete with the Olympics, as they would hold it 2 years after the 1928 Olympics, and hold it every 4 years as to not compete. And so they sent out to all their participating countries, and they gave them a deadline of February 28, 1930 to accept being part of their first World Cup. And they wanted to have at least 16 teams for a knockout-style tournament. And they would actually have a second division if there was enough teams. But they were not able to get to 16. And the main reason for that was due to it being held in Uruguay. And why did Uruguay get the very first World Cup? And the reason was because they were celebrating their first constitution, and they had recently started to build a giant stadium that could hold the event in the Estadio Centenario, which would be able to hold almost 70,000 fans. But this decision actually was a reason why most countries didn't decide to participate. And it's not because they didn't like Uruguay, it was financial cost, as they were currently going through the Great Depression that had affected not only America, but the entire world. So many countries thought that the long trip from Europe or Asia would cost too much and take too much time from the players to be traveling back and forth to compete during this time. They were able to get interest from the Americas, both North and South America teams, but few interest from the European teams. And by that February deadline, there were 0 European teams that accepted the offer. But as a show of support, the Uruguayan Football Association sent a letter saying they would help pay for travel expenses to be able to compete at the first World Cup. And this was enough to get 4 European countries to be able to agree to come to the first World Cup in Belgium, France, Romania, and Yugoslavia, which brought their total of commitments up to 16, which on top of those European countries included Mexico, United States, Argentina, Bulgaria, Brazil, Chile, Paraguay, Europe. Now there was 2 Asian countries that agreed to show up in Japan and Siam, who later withdrew their acceptance as they didn't think they could make the trip. And then 1 Africa country accepted the invitation in Egypt. Although when it came time for the event, they missed their boat and were unable to make it for the start of the competition. So we ended up with only 13 teams out of the 14 that agreed to show up. And to just give you an idea of how hard travel was back then, these teams actually did end up traveling together. The Romanians boarded the SS Conte Verde first in Italy on June 1921, and they went to go pick up the French and the Yugoslavians at the French port and then they all went to go pick up the Belgians from Spain. And they also had all the referees for the tournament and the trophy for the tournament on board. And while they made their way to South America, they also picked up the Brazilians. And after all of this, on July 4th, 1930, they finally made it to Uruguay, an almost 2-week trip just to make it to a soccer competition, which meant they would take them almost 2 weeks to completely return back home. So just a month taken away from their lives to compete in this soccer tournament, which is pretty incredible when you think about it today, as it only takes you maybe a day to travel anywhere in the world to compete in these international competitions. Then on July 13th, they started the actual World Cup. And they did something very similar to what we have today in the World Cup, where they had pool play, where teams are broken up into different groups. And all of those teams play a round robin, which means you play everyone in that group. And whoever has the most wins and the most points goes on to the knockout stage. And it's very similar to what we have today. And this was on a smaller scale, but still very exciting and fun. And they had 4 groups. Group 1 had Argentina, Chile, France, and Mexico, which had Argentina winning and going to the knockout stage. Group 2 had Brazil, Bulgaria, and Yugoslavia, where Yugoslavia was the winner and qualified for the knockout stage. Group 3 featured Uruguay, Peru, and Romania, and Uruguay, the home country, won out and made it to the knockout stage. And the final group was Belgium, Paraguay, and the United States. And the United States was able to win this group and head to the knockout stage. And the knockout stage featured a couple of blowouts, where the United States took on Argentina in a drain-wrenched battle, where Argentina came out on top 6-1. And the other match was Yugoslavia versus Uruguay. And Uruguay, with the local crowd by its side, was able to dominate and win 6-1 as well, setting up Argentina and Uruguay an all South America World Cup. And on July 30th, 1930, in front of almost 70,000 fans, played at the stadium that won them the right to host the games, the Estadio Centro in Montevideo, Uruguay, started a tradition that is still going to this day. And at this time, many countries had their own style of ball, and the ball was not as uniform as it is today, as every soccer ball back then was made by hand, and there was little differences depending on where country you were from and how you were used to these balls. And so each team was fighting to use their ball for the World Cup final. And FIFA made a compromise saying that Argentina would get to use their local ball in the first half, and Uruguay could use theirs in the second half. As the game started, it was a hard-fought battle between both teams. And it wasn't until 12 minutes when Pablo Dorando put Uruguay on top. But just 8 minutes later, Argentina wing Carlos Pelese was able to match it, making the score 1-1. And after a hard-fought first half, Argentina had the lead 2-1. But coming out in the second half, Uruguay went out aggressively. And in the 12th minute of the second half, Pedro Cia was able to tie it up 2-2. Then in the 68th minute, Santos Arate gave them the lead, and they would not look back. And with just a minute left in the game, Hector Castro sealed the game and the victory for Uruguay with the final score of 4-2, making Uruguay the very first World Cup champion. And this World Cup was a great success as they continued. And in 1934, they had 36 countries apply for entry and had to have qualifications to get that number down to 16. And Uruguay showed its power as a national team. And in 1950, they would again win the World Cup. But Argentina would have to wait a little while, as it wasn't until 1978 when they won their first World Cup. But they also won it in 1986 and in 2022. And Uruguay wasn't the only country to win the World Cup while also hosting. As in 1934, Italy hosted the World Cup and won. And the hosts also won when England hosted in 1966 and West Germany in 1974, as well as Argentina in 1978. And this one tournament has led to the growth of soccer all over the world and is one of the most popular sporting events ever to be held. And in 1991, they branched out and started to hold the Women's World Cup, which has grown in popularity as well, showing that soccer is still alive and strong. And I want to thank you for jumping back in the past with us to learn all about this great, crazy start to this tournament. And if you liked it, I want to hear about it. Please connect with us on our social medias. We're on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, Mastodon, Threads. Wherever you like to socialize, we are there. You can follow us at Daily Sports History, or even leave us a message or a voicemail on our website, dailysportshistory.com. And come back tomorrow for more Daily Sports History. And did you catch the answer to today's trivia question? Why were there only 13 teams that competed in the very first World Cup when there were supposed to be 14? Well, it's because the only African country, Egypt, missed their boat.